On a gray Thursday afternoon, the campus cafeteria felt louder than usual, crowded with trays, laughter, and the restless energy of students who were pretending not to be exhausted. I had chosen the farthest table near the vending machines, hoping for 10 quiet minutes and a paper cup of coffee strong enough to rescue me from a week that already felt far too long. Outside, light rain blurred the windows and made everything look even more tired. A few days earlier, one of my closest friends had dragged me across the humanities building with the urgency of someone chasing destiny. She had a crush, the kind that appears instantly and convinces otherwise rational people that a stranger's smile might contain the answer to their entire semester. She wanted information, and for reasons still unclear. I had become the designated investigator for situations like that, a role I had somehow earned without ever applying for it. The guy she pointed out was standing in a corridor with a couple of friends, leaning against the wall as if he had been sculpted there by a committee devoted to average charm. He was not ugly, not extraordinary. Just one of those boys who somehow become campus legends because enough people agree to find them attractive at the same time. Beside him stood a girl whose stare could have cut glass, and in seconds I understood that she noticed everything around him. That stare stayed with me longer than the boy did. Every time I passed that wing of the building over the next several days, I would spot the same pair together, and almost every day, another friend would confess a sudden fascination with him, asking me whether he was single, what department he belonged to, and whether he seemed approachable. It became absurd with the speed only college life can manage, as if the whole campus had quietly agreed to choose the same harmless obsession. Eventually, after hearing the same question from so many people that I nearly considered making a public announcement, I found out the truth. Kay and the sharp-eyed girl were dating. The mystery ended there for me. I told my friends. They acted heartbroken for an hour or two. And then they moved on with the resilience of people who fall in love with a new face every other Tuesday. I thought that was the end of it. The kind of silly subplot college life produces and forgets by Friday. It was not. The girl had apparently mistaken my passing glances, repeated questions, and occasional appearances in the corridor for something far more dramatic. In her version of events, I was not a harmless messenger collecting information for half the women on campus. I was a threat, a rival, an unnamed villain circling the edges of her relationship. I had no idea she was building that story in her head until the afternoon she came for me. I saw her before she reached my table. There was a purpose in the way she walked, a kind of tightly controlled fury that made the air around her seem sharper. Students nearby noticed too. Conversations dimmed, a few heads turned. It was one of those moments when everyone senses that something is about to happen and silently decides to keep watching from a safe distance, pretending not to be interested while being completely invested. She stopped in front of me and planted her hand on the table with enough force to make my plastic spoon jump. I looked up slowly, partly because I did not want to appear rattled and partly because I truly could not believe I was about to be accused of stealing a man I had never wanted. Her expression held anger, certainty, and the satisfaction of someone who believed she was finally confronting the source of her problem in the most public way possible. For a second, I considered the sensible options. I could apologize for a misunderstanding I had not created. I could explain every awkward detail and drag half the campus into the story. I could stand up and leave, which would only make me look guilty. None of those choices felt safe, and none felt quick. What I needed was a way to collapse the tension before it turned into a public spectacle with my name attached to it forever. So I did the only thing my panic and instinct could agree on in that bizarre second. I stayed calm. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands, and let silence stretch just long enough to throw her off balance. It was amazing how often people expected fear and did not know what to do when they were handed composure instead. She sat down across from me, not because she trusted me, but because I had somehow made that seem like my decision. Her eyes searched my face for guilt, smugness, maybe even embarrassment. What she found instead was someone trying very hard not to laugh at the sheer ridiculousness of the situation. I knew the wrong sentence could send everything spiraling. I also knew logic would probably fail. Jealousy rarely responds to evidence in real time. It responds to disruption, to surprise, to anything strong enough to interrupt the story it has already begun telling itself. That realization arrived with the speed of lightning and the quality of terrible ideas that somehow work. If she believed every glance was desire, then the only way to break the frame was to redirect the desire entirely. I did not plan the line. I did not weigh consequences. I simply reached for the most impossible answer available. The one thing she would never expect. The one statement absurd enough to short-circuit the confrontation before it caught fire. The anger in her face faltered first, replaced by confusion so immediate it almost looked graceful. Then came stillness, the kind that follows a sudden power outage when every machine in a building has stopped at once. Her certainty vanished. The performance she had prepared, the accusations, the hard questions, the dramatic victory she had rehearsed in her mind, all of it collapsed because the script no longer made sense. She had been ready for competition, not bewilderment. Around us, the cafeteria kept moving, but more quietly now, as if the room itself had leaned in. I remember the sound of a blender somewhere behind the counter and the strange brightness of the fluorescent lights over her shoulder. It felt unreal, like one of those scenes you replay later and wonder whether exhaustion distorted your memory. But the look on her face was unmistakable. She was no longer furious. She was trying to understand what universe she had walked into. Once confusion entered the room, anger lost its grip. That is the thing people rarely mention about conflict. Rage needs a stable story to survive. It needs a villain, a wound, and a direction to move in. The moment uncertainty cracks that structure, emotion starts looking for somewhere else to go. In her case, it rushed into awkwardness. Her posture softened, her eyes dropped for half a second. The war she had marched in to start was dissolving before either of us could name it. I did not press my advantage. That would have been cruel, and cruelty was never the point. I only held the moment steady long enough for her to realize there was no fight here worth winning. Whatever she'd imagined, whatever rumor or instinct had brought her to my table, it no longer had oxygen. The dramatic confrontation she wanted had slipped into something far smaller, stranger, and harder to explain to anyone waiting nearby for a satisfying explosion. She left not with the victorious storm of someone who had defended her territory, but with the unsettled quiet of a person forced to reconsider her certainty in public. I watched her go and felt my own heartbeat return in stages, like a system rebooting after a crash. Only then did I understand how dangerously close that afternoon had come to turning into one of those campus incidents that acquires witnesses. Rumors and multiple contradictory versions before sunset. The first person to reach my table afterward was not a friend, but a stranger from the economics department who looked at me with open admiration, as if she had just witnessed some advanced diplomatic maneuver. She asked what I had said. I told her it was better for everyone if the details remained classified. Within an hour, that answer had somehow become more interesting than the truth. And by evening, the campus rumor mill had already begun grinding my life into folklore. By dinner, I heard at least 3 versions of the story. In one, I had insulted the boyfriend so thoroughly that the girlfriend retreated in shame. In another, I had exposed a secret affair. In the most entertaining version, I had stared danger in the face and somehow seduced it into surrender. None of those stories were accurate. But accuracy has never been the first priority of students with too much imagination and just enough free time to weaponize it. My friends were delighted in the way only people far removed from consequences can be. They replayed the setup, the tension, my expression before the confrontation, and then demanded the exact wording I had used. I refused to give it to them at first, not out of mystery, but because saying it aloud made the whole incident sound even less believable. Still, their persistence wore me down, and when I finally told them, the room exploded with the kind of laughter that leaves people breathless. What surprised me most was not their reaction, but mine. Beneath the humor sat a thin layer of unease. I had escaped the moment, yes, but escape is not the same as resolution. I kept wondering whether she would return after she had time to recover from the shock. I imagined her talking to her friends, reassembling her confidence, deciding she had been tricked. College conflicts rarely end neatly. They pause, mutate, and come back wearing a different jacket. The next morning, every hallway felt like a test. I noticed couples more sharply, noticed side glances, noticed clusters of students lowering their voices as I passed. It was probably paranoia, but campus life thrives on the suspicion that everyone has heard something about you before breakfast. By noon, I had convinced myself the entire situation had grown larger in my absence. that the girl would be waiting outside one of my classes with a new accusation and a stronger audience. Instead, what I got was silence. She passed me near the library steps and did not stop. She looked at me once, quickly, then away. It should have been a relief, yet the restraint in that glance unsettled me more than anger had. Fury is simple. You know where it stands? But ambiguity leaves room for too many possibilities. Had she understood? Had she forgiven? Had she decided I was not worth the effort? Or had she simply chosen a better time for whatever came next? 3 days went by before I learned the answer, and it came from an unlikely source. A classmate from her department sat beside me in a lecture hall and, without any attempt at subtlety, told me the girl had spent the week acting strangely quiet. She had not spoken much about her boyfriend. She had not repeated the accusations. She had only said that she might have misread me, and that the moment in the cafeteria had been, in her exact words, deeply confusing. Deeply confusing felt like a generous description for what had happened. Still, that small report changed something in me. Until then, I had thought of her only as an aggressor, someone driven by insecurity and ready to make it my problem. But insecurity is often just fear wearing sharper makeup. Maybe she had been protecting something she thought was fragile. Maybe she had seen too many girls circle around men who enjoyed being admired. Maybe she was tired of feeling replaceable. Once I allowed that possibility, the whole incident softened at the edges. I did not excuse the confrontation, but I could see its human outline more clearly. Jealousy is rarely about the outsider alone. Most of the time, it is built from private doubts, old comparisons, and the exhausting labor of trying to believe you are enough in a world that keeps handing your partner alternatives. I had become a symbol in a story that was already hurting her long before I entered it. That understanding arrived just in time, because fate, with its usual cheap sense of humor, placed us in the same line at the campus coffee stand the following week. There was no dramatic music, no crowd, no table between us, just the smell of burnt espresso, the rattle of coins, and two people trapped by coincidence in a space too small for pretending the other did not exist. She stood one place ahead of me, shoulders tense, as if deciding whether to leave or stay. When she finally glanced back, the hostility I expected was absent. In its place was something closer to embarrassment, softened by caution. She looked like someone still trying to determine whether I was dangerous, ridiculous, or unexpectedly kind. I gave her a small nod, the social equivalent of placing a fragile object on a table and stepping away from it. She nodded back. No smile, no apology, just an acknowledgement that the world had not ended and we were both still in it. That tiny exchange could have remained meaningless, but the campus has a way of forcing unfinished stories into contact until they either heal or become legend. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw her everywhere. Outside the registrar's office, near the south gate, by the bookstore, once beneath an umbrella during a sudden burst of rain. Each encounter carried a little less tension than the one before. We never stopped to speak, yet something in the air between us kept becoming less armed. At some point, I began to notice details I had missed when she was only the girl with the dangerous stare. She had a habit of tucking loose strands of hair behind one ear when she was anxious. She always carried too many pens. She looked impatient while waiting in line, but strangely gentle when talking to older staff members. It is difficult to remain the villain in someone's imagination once they begin seeing the ordinary textures of your life up close. The boyfriend, meanwhile, receded almost completely from the story. That felt fitting. He had been the center of everyone else's attention, and somehow the least interesting person involved. What remained between me and her had little to do with him anymore. Our strange collision had become about perception, ego, vulnerability, and the weird accidents that forced two strangers to recognize each other beyond first impressions. Sometimes, the one who starts the drama is not the one who stays. One evening after class, I found myself thinking about the absurd sentence that had saved me and wondering why it had worked so well. The answer, I realized, was not charm. It was impossibility. I had broken the logic of possession. In a world where people expect rivalry over men, redirecting the emotional current elsewhere had shattered the old assumptions. It was not a strategy I would recommend as a general life policy, but in that moment, it had opened a door where none existed. Weeks later, the full story still followed me in fragments. Some people greeted me with teasing respect. Others asked whether I gave lessons in conflict management. One dramatic friend called it psychological aikido, which sounded too elegant for something born from caffeine, fear, and reckless instinct. But beneath the jokes, I sensed why the story endured. Everyone was tired of the usual script, where women are pushed into competing over attention they never asked to value so highly. There was something strangely satisfying, maybe even liberating, about the fact that the confrontation had ended not with violence, humiliation, or male validation, but with the collapse of a bad assumption. No one won the boy. No one lost face publicly in the way gossip had hoped. Instead, a story built on possession bent unexpectedly towards self-awareness. That may be why the memory stayed with me. It had begun with suspicion and exposed how flimsy suspicion can be when examined too closely. I eventually learned, through the same unstoppable network of mutual acquaintances that had created the problem in the first place, that she and the boyfriend did not last much longer. Their breakup had nothing to do with me. By all accounts, they had been tense for months, circling the same arguments, mistrusting the same silences. Hearing that did not make me happy, but it confirmed what I had already guessed. I had not threatened a strong relationship. I had brushed against a cracked one. After that, I expected our connection to fade completely, to become one more odd campus memory filed away beneath deadlines, bad coffee, and unfinished papers. Yet, some stories resist disappearance because they alter the way you see people. I no longer looked at confrontational moments only in terms of offense and defense. I started noticing the fear underneath them, the loneliness, and the posture of people trying to protect themselves from being the last to understand what others already know. That shift changed more than I anticipated. I became slower to judge, quicker to ask what unseen pressure had shaped the behavior in front of me. It did not make me passive, and it certainly did not mean I welcomed drama. But it gave me another lens. Not every attack deserves compassion, yet many are born from some private panic that has lost its way and chosen the nearest face as a target. Recognizing that does not excuse harm. It simply explains its strange direction. Near the end of the semester, I saw her sitting alone on a low wall outside the language building, staring at the red leaves that had started collecting along the path. The campus looked gentler in that season, as if even stress had been wrapped in softer light. I almost kept walking. Then she glanced up, recognized me, and did something I had not expected from her at all. She smiled first, small and careful, like someone testing whether peace still held. I smiled back, and for the first time since the cafeteria, neither of us looked ready to defend anything. We did not need a long conversation to confirm what time had already done. Whatever threat she once imagined, whatever role I once occupied in her mind, it had dissolved. We had outlived the misunderstanding. In that quiet exchange, I felt something settle that I had not realized was still unsettled. Not friendship exactly, but the end of a false story, which is its own kind of relief. When I think about that season now, I do not remember the boy's face nearly as clearly as I remember hers changing in real time from fury to confusion, from confusion to reluctant humanity. That transformation taught me more than any dramatic argument could have. People arrive in our lives wearing the masks their fear has chosen for them. Sometimes, all it takes to loosen the mask is one unexpected moment, one impossible answer, one refusal to play the role the conflict has assigned. There is a temptation, after telling a story like this, to turn it into a lesson about wit, confidence, or always having the right line at the perfect moment. But that would be dishonest. Most of life is not scripted that cleanly. I was not brave in a cinematic way. I was startled, cornered, and trying not to become cafeteria entertainment. If anything deserves credit, it is the odd survival intelligence that appears when embarrassment and danger shake hands inside your nervous system. Still, I cannot deny that something in me enjoyed the absurdity of it all. College is often sold as a place of academic discovery, but just as often it is a laboratory for social chaos. Tiny misunderstandings swell into emotional weather systems. Innocent glances become evidence. People build entire inner novels around 2 seconds of eye contact. And sometimes, if you are very unlucky or very lucky, You find yourself cast in a scene you never auditioned for and have to improvise your own ending. If I were telling this story to someone younger, someone just entering the exhausting theater of campus life, I would not advise them to copy me word for word. Improvisation is dangerous when treated like doctrine. What I would say instead is this: never underestimate the power of refusing the script that conflict hands you. Most fights survive because everyone agrees to play their assigned part. The moment one person steps sideways, the machinery stutters, and a new path becomes possible. That sideways step can look like humor, gentleness, honesty, or even silence, depending on the moment. In my case, it looked like an outrageous sentence delivered with the calm of someone who had run out of better options. But beneath the absurdity was a simple instinct. I did not want to hurt her. I did not want to defend myself through humiliation or cruelty. I wanted the danger to end without creating a fresh wound, and somehow that intention carried more force than strategy ever could. The older I get, the more I believe people remember emotional temperature more vividly than facts. They forget the exact words, the order of events, the outfit, the date. What stays is the feeling of being cornered, or spared, or surprised into seeing differently. Maybe that is why this memory never left me. It was not just funny. It was a pivot. A moment when a story heading toward heat turned suddenly toward bewilderment, then empathy, and finally, something close to peace. For all its comedy, the moment also revealed how quickly women are encouraged to police one another while men drift carelessly through the center of the frame. He did almost nothing, and yet all the emotional labor gathered around him like static. Her fear targeted me. My response had to manage her fear. The audience watched us, not him. That imbalance lingered with me long after the laughter faded. It made me wonder how many conflicts begin inside systems no one pauses long enough to question. Maybe that is the hidden reason the story works so well when people hear it now. On the surface, it is an awkward campus incident with an unexpected punchline. Underneath, it is about disrupting an old pattern. It is about what happens when competition is replaced with confusion, and confusion leaves just enough room for people to become human again. No grand speech accomplished that. No moral lecture. Just a sharp turn away from what jealousy, pride, and spectatorship had all been expecting. Even now, when life places me near conflict, I sometimes remember that cafeteria table and the invisible line between escalation and imagination. There is always a second, brief, but real, when a moment can still become something else. Not every situation can be solved in. Some require boundaries, distance, or open resistance. But some can be disarmed by surprise, by refusing inherited roles, and by speaking so unexpectedly that anger forgets what it came to do. That knowledge has stayed useful. So if you ask me what really happened that afternoon, I would say this. A girl approached me carrying fear disguised as anger. I met her with composure I did not entirely feel. Then instinct handed me a sentence strange enough to break the machinery of jealousy before it could grind both of us into a public mess. Everything that followed, the rumors, the glances, the eventual peace, grew out of that single impossible turn. It was ridiculous, yes, but it was also unexpectedly humane. And that is how one ordinary lunch break became a story that outlived the semester. Not because it was romantic, and not because it was heroic, but because it exposed the fragile stories people build about one another in the absence of clarity. We think we are defending truth when often we are protecting fear. We think we understand a glance, a rumor, a presence, when really we are filling silence with our own worst guesses. Sometimes survival begins by refusing to guess in the expected way. Long after the cafeteria emptied and the rumors cooled, I carried away an image that had nothing to do with victory. It was simply the sight of another person's anger loosening into uncertainty and then into something softer. Almost embarrassed, almost relieved. That change reminded me that most human drama is less solid than it first appears. Beneath the noise, many conflicts are just misunderstandings, standing on stilts, trying to look taller than the hurt that created them in the first place. If this story has a final note, it is not about cleverness. It is about choosing, in one volatile moment, not to become cruel. I could have mocked her. I could have humiliated her in front of everyone watching. Instead, I reached sideways into absurdity, and absurdity gave us both a way out. That is the strange gift of imagination. Sometimes it does more than entertain. Sometimes it opens a door where anger expected only a wall, and two people walk away with less damage than before.